Part 1. The conversation that changed everything. When I married Richard, I believed I knew exactly what my future would look like. I expected the usual adjustments that come with joining two families together, but I never imagined how complicated life would become in the months that followed. Richard was a kind and hard-working man. Marrying him was one of the best decisions I had ever made. He brought stability, warmth, and happiness into my life. Along with Richard came his son, Logan, who had recently turned 21 and was trying to figure out what direction he wanted his life to take. At first, Logan and I barely knew each other. Our conversations were polite but brief. We were still learning how to fit into each other's lives. Over time, however, things became easier. We talked more often, shared meals, and gradually built a relationship based on trust and mutual respect. Logan was mature for his age. He was thoughtful, responsible, and surprisingly easy to talk to. As the months passed, I began to see that beneath his calm personality, he carried a lot of pressure. He was facing important decisions about his future, and the uncertainty weighed heavily on him. One morning, Richard had already left for work. The house was quiet, and I was looking forward to a peaceful day. While getting ready, I found myself thinking about a conversation Logan and I had shared the night before. We had talked about his goals, his concerns, and the challenges he was facing as he prepared for the next chapter of his life. Something about that conversation stayed with me. Logan had spoken openly, but I could tell there was still something bothering him. There was a hesitation in his voice and a concern in his eyes that he hadn't fully explained. As I finished getting ready, I heard a knock at the bathroom door. "Are you busy?" Logan asked. His voice sounded different than usual. "Not really," I replied. "Is everything okay?" There was a brief pause before he answered. "Can we talk for a minute?" The seriousness in his tone immediately caught my attention. A few moments later, we sat down in the nearby room. Logan looked exhausted, as though he hadn't slept much the night before. He rubbed his hands together nervously and stared at the floor. I could tell he was struggling to find the right words. "What's going on?" I asked gently. He let out a long breath. "I don't really know how to explain it," he admitted. "Lately, I've been feeling lost." I listened carefully. Logan explained that he felt overwhelmed by the future. He wasn't sure whether he was making the right decisions. Every path seemed uncertain, and the pressure to figure everything out was becoming difficult to handle. For months, he had tried to keep those feelings to himself. He didn't want to worry Richard, and he didn't want anyone to think he couldn't manage his own problems. But carrying everything alone had become exhausting. As he spoke, I realized just how much stress he had been hiding. "You don't have to figure everything out today," I told him. "I know," he said quietly, "but it feels like everyone expects me to." We talked for nearly an hour. For the first time, Logan spoke honestly about his fears, his doubts, and the pressure he felt from trying to meet everyone's expectations. When the conversation finally ended, he seemed relieved, not because his problems had disappeared, but because he had finally shared them with someone. The rest of the day passed quietly. I finished my errands, cleaned the house, and tried to focus on normal tasks. Yet my thoughts kept returning to our conversation. I couldn't stop thinking about how much responsibility Logan had been carrying on his own. The more I reflected on it, the more I realized that he needed support, not advice. He needed people who would listen without judgment and remind him that he didn't have to solve every problem immediately. That evening, the house felt unusually quiet. Richard was away on a work trip, leaving Logan and me alone at home for several days. As the hours passed, I found myself wondering how Logan was doing. I hoped our conversation had helped, even if only a little. Late that night, I heard the front door open. A few moments later, Logan walked into the living room. He looked calmer than he had that morning, though there was still a hint of uncertainty on his face. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Logan smiled slightly. "Thanks for listening earlier." I smiled back. "You don't have to thank me." "Actually, I do," he said. "I've been carrying all of that around for a long time." I could hear the sincerity in his voice. We sat down and continued talking. This time the conversation felt lighter. We discussed his interests, possible career paths, and the things he wanted to accomplish in the future. For the first time in weeks, he seemed hopeful. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but he no longer looked like someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. As the evening came to an end, I realized something important. Families aren't built only through blood relationships. They are built through trust, through difficult conversations, through showing up for one another when life becomes complicated. Neither of us knew what challenges lay ahead, but one thing had become clear. The conversation we shared that day marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where honesty, understanding, and difficult choices would shape the future of our family in ways none of us could yet imagine. Part 2. Secrets, Pressure, and a Difficult Choice. The days following our conversation felt different. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere at home. Logan seemed more open than before. Instead of keeping everything bottled up inside, he started sharing his thoughts and concerns more freely. I considered that a positive sign. For weeks, maybe even months, he had been carrying the weight of uncertainty on his shoulders. Now, at least, he wasn't facing it alone. Richard was still away on business, which meant the house remained unusually quiet. Without the normal distractions of daily family life, there was more time for conversations and reflection. One evening, Logan and I sat outside in the backyard as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. The weather was pleasant, and the neighborhood was peaceful. For a while, neither of us said much. We simply enjoyed the calm after a busy day. Eventually, Logan broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if you're making the right choices?" he asked. I turned toward him. "Everyone wonders that at some point," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads," he admitted. "No matter which direction I choose, I'm afraid I'll regret it later." His words carried a level of honesty that surprised me. I could tell this wasn't just about career decisions or future plans. It was about confidence. It was about fear. Fear of failure. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of choosing the wrong path. For many young adults, those fears are common, but that didn't make them any easier to carry. "You don't have to have every answer right now," I told him. "I know," he said with a small laugh. "People keep telling me that. Maybe because it's true." That finally earned a genuine smile. For the first time in days, he looked a little lighter. As the conversation continued, Logan opened up about his goals. He talked about opportunities he was considering and dreams he had never shared with many people. Some ideas seemed exciting. Others felt risky. But for the first time, he sounded hopeful instead of trapped. Over the next few days, we continued having similar conversations. Richard called regularly from his trip, checking in on both of us. Everything sounded normal on the surface, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that important decisions were approaching. Logan was changing, not as a person, but in the way he viewed his future. The uncertainty that once controlled him was slowly being replaced by determination. Still, challenges remained. One night, I found him sitting alone in the living room long after midnight. The television was off. The room was dark except for a small lamp in the corner. "You should be asleep," I joked. He smiled weakly. I could say the same thing. I sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. "What if I fail?" The question came so quietly that it almost caught me off guard. I understood immediately what he meant. He wasn't asking about one specific goal. He was asking about life. What if I make the wrong decision? What if things don't work out? What if everyone expects more from me than I can give? Those were the questions hiding beneath the surface. I thought carefully before answering. "Failure doesn't define you," I said. "What matters is whether you keep moving forward." He listened closely. "You know," I continued, "every successful person you admire has made mistakes. Every one of them." "Really?" "Of course." "Then why does it feel like everyone else has everything figured out?" I couldn't help laughing. "Trust me, most people are just better at hiding their confusion." That finally made him laugh too. For the first time that night, the tension eased. But despite the lighter mood, I knew something important was happening. Logan wasn't looking for solutions anymore. He was searching for confidence. And confidence is something nobody can give you. It's something you build over time. The following week, Richard's return drew closer. Normally, that would have been exciting. But this time, I felt nervous. Not because anything was wrong. Because so much had changed while he was away. Logan had become more independent, more focused, more honest about his struggles. I wondered whether Richard would immediately notice the difference. The night before Richard's return, Logan and I sat at the kitchen table discussing plans for the future. Applications, career opportunities, potential moves, big decisions, adult decisions. At one point, he looked up and said something that stayed with me. "Thank you." "For what?" "For listening when I needed someone." The sincerity in his voice caught me by surprise. I smiled. That's what family is supposed to do. He nodded quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked down at the table. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. "None of us do," I said. "But you'll figure it out." "How can you be so sure?" Because over the past few weeks, I had watched him grow stronger. I had watched him face fears he had avoided for months. I had watched him stop running from difficult decisions. So I answered honestly, "Because you're stronger than you think." The next morning, Richard returned home. The house immediately felt different. Full again, lively again, normal again. Richard greeted us with his usual energy, eager to tell stories about his trip and catch up on everything he had missed. At first, everything seemed exactly as it always had. But beneath the surface, important changes had already taken place. Logan wasn't the same uncertain young man Richard had left behind. He was beginning to discover who he wanted to become. And although none of us realized it at the time, the choices waiting ahead would test our family in ways we never expected. The real challenge was only beginning.